I'm David Hearn, the host of Authors Reading, and today I'll be talking to Tonya Jewel Blessing. She is the author of The Melody of the Mulberries. Hi, Jewel. Thanks for accepting my invitation to chat about your work.
Hi, David. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Jewel, if you could tell people a little bit about yourself. You have certainly a very interesting life.
Oh, thank you. You know what? My background is spent most of my life in ministry. So I've worked as a children's pastor, youth pastor, women's pastor, administrative pastor. And then my husband and I operated a retreat facility for a number of years in Colorado. And we hosted missionaries from around the world. My husband retired from being a Denver police detective, and we felt led to go to South Africa. So we've been in South Africa for about 10 years. So we work with local leaders there and just equipping them and helping them minister to rural communities. So life has been very interesting for me. I started writing just kind of, I don't want to say a fluke, because I think God orchestrates and ordains our lives. But I was invited to join a writer's group. And I'd written devotionals for years for women in leadership. And I thought, I'm just going to try my hand at writing a novel. And that's how I got started writing my 2 novels.
Okay. Yeah, and on the choice of where you were writing them about, West Virginia and that area, and the period too, the 20s, which I think is very interesting too, that what you're talking about 100 years ago is still, unfortunately, many of those issues that you talked about are still there today. The poverty, the poor education, the racial tension, the pandemic, which I thought was very interesting too, that you actually talked about a pandemic at that particular time too. What it'll be like 100 years from now? Will we still have the same problems, or will things be cleaned up? What did you do as far as all the research for your book?
Well, my mom actually grew up in this rural community called Big Creek, and that's the setting of the story. And so I have actually been to Big Creek a number of times. I spent summers and visited Appalachia throughout my childhood. So the setting just seemed natural for me. And my mom actually was born in the 1930s, so she was born later than my book covers. But I just think that Appalachia is such a unique place. In the 1920s, I chose that time period because I didn't want to necessarily write about World War I, and I didn't want the book to focus on the Great Depression, which it seems like lots of books cover World War I and cover the Great Depression. So I wanted to set my book between those 2 major events, is why I ended up in the late 1920s.
So you say that was the genesis of why you wrote it, basically.
Yeah, I did it because, my mom, even though she was born in the 1930s, she grew up washing the family clothes in a creek. She learned to cook on a wood-burning stove. She walked a long way to go to school. My mom was the first one in her family to graduate from high school. Her father was in a wheelchair, and her life was very hard. She was one of 11 siblings. And I've just been inspired by how God redeemed my mom's life and set her on a path. And I wanted to write a book about redemption, where God takes women who are struggling, and men too, who are struggling with the difficulties of life, and how he alters their path and just redeems their hardships and makes something beautiful.
Make sure people know what your book looks like. The one thing that I was interested in too, are you going to be doing a Kindle version of this book? Because I see that there isn't one yet.
Yeah, there's a Kindle version already available. And then there's also an audio version available.
Okay. I saw that your previous one was doing quite well. The first book of this series. Yeah, that was. I was looking at your reviews, and looking at the number of people who bought it, and looking at the stats in Amazon, seeing that people are in fact are buying it. So you're getting a check every month, which is great.
I am, and that's nice.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, yeah, it's a lot of work to write a book, and for me, it was great pleasure, but it's a lot of work.
So one of the things I really liked about her book was some of these sayings that she had in the beginning of it. In chapter 12, she had, to get rid of warts, steal someone's dishcloth and bury it. The warts will go away. And I do have some warts, and I'm going to try it. So anyways, then she uses dialect in her book a lot. So I'm just going to read a little teeny bit about from this particular chapter. It says, Coral didn't mean to look at the words from her brother. Well, maybe she did, but only because Lottie was so quiet, and that worried her. The note was confusing yet humorous. Come home. I done sung to a sow, and she ain't near as pretty as you. When Coral glanced up, Lottie entered the room. I'm sorry, sister. It ain't my place to be reading your private words. Lottie started laughing. I'm glad I'm prettier than a pig. Coral felt embarrassed. Forgive me, I was worried. I wrote the note, Coral, so I would remember to tell you word for word what Rudy's mama said. It still ain't right. Lottie smiled. I'm forgiving you now. Forgive yourself. I'm wanting to talk about your brother. I'm thinking that he misses me and wants me home. I'm also thinking as much. Coral sat on the settee and patted the place beside her. It's taken longer than I thought with Charlie. We done visited him a couple of times and still he's acting like a mule. Lottie giggled while taking her place next to her friend. It ain't nice to be name calling, but it's really name calling if they ain't truth in the words. Anyways, so I like that. I like your way that you put all this dialect in there, and that
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
Thanks. Well, one of the editors of the book was actually my cousin, and she is a school teacher in West Virginia. And so I had her edit the book, or the publishing house had her edit the book, partly because of the dialogue. I wanted to make sure that, people still drop their G's in West Virginia, and there's still terms and stuff that are used. And I wanted the book to be as accurate as possible.
Right, and I think it probably is. I did want to ask you though about your going to South Africa. Why did you choose South Africa? What was the reasoning behind that particular move?
My husband grew up in a missionary family, and we've been married almost 40 years. And when we were engaged, my husband told me, you know what, Tonya, God has called me to help missionaries. And are you okay with that? And I thought, well, sure, I don't know what that looks like, but I'm okay with that. So we had this retreat facility and housed maybe 2,000 missionaries over the course of 10 years. And when my husband retired, we made the decision that we actually wanted to go on the field and we wanted to work with leaders. And so South Africa, my husband had been there a couple of times, and we just decided that was a good fit for us. So we are having the time of our lives. We started there, just the two of us. We now have 7 staff members. We oversee 30 some projects, mostly in the rural areas, and it's been amazing.
And I had listened to one of your interviews with someone else, and you told a horrible story about a snake, which my wife said if she had been that person instead of you, that she probably would have just died right there from fear, not even from the bite. But I thought that was very interesting too. Your experience of being bitten by a snake. Well, you were in bed, right, at the time when it occurred?
I was in bed. I was in bed reading, and my husband was, I don't know, in the kitchen doing something. And I turned the light off and was just kind of hunkering down in the covers, and I felt something bite my pinky finger. And so it's dark. I reached across my body and thought, okay, what is going on? And instantly I could tell it was a snake that had latched onto my finger. So I ripped it off and threw it across the room, got out of bed and went out in the kitchen and told my husband, you know, I think I've been bitten by a snake. And I think at first he didn't really believe me, but when he turned around and looked at my finger, it was just obvious. You could see the puncture wounds and, you know, not to be graphic, but the blood dripping on the floor.
Sure.
Well, you know, and I say to him, now, are you going to suck out the venom like they do on TV? And he says, there's not a chance. Not a chance I'm doing that. So, you know, it was a spitting cobra, Mozambique spitting cobra. And most people die from those kind of bites. And I really was almost a dry bite. I've got one spot where they think a little bit of venom got into my system, but you know, God just protected me and all was well. And yeah, I've survived and have a great story to tell about it.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. Now, were you living in a treehouse at that time, or was that a real house you were living in? I mean, I'm wondering.
We were living in a real house at the time, yeah.
Okay.
But I thought that, you know, I thought I was fine from the snake bite. And really, physically, I was fine. But we ended up moving. I just had a hard time going back to our bedroom, getting in that same bed where I'd been bitten. And so we did end up moving. But it's been a great story to tell. And one of the things that was amazing about it, witchcraft is such a problem in the region where we live. And snakes are used in witchcraft. And we've been ministering, or I've been talking to our ladies' Bible studies. And I've been talking about how God gives us power to tread upon serpents and scorpions. And just within a couple of weeks of that, I got bit. And so I was able to go back to those women and say, look, please don't walk in fear. Don't walk in fear that someone's going to curse you or someone's going to put a hex on you, because life is bigger than that. So.
Have you read? I'm sure you probably have, but your book actually reminded me of Barbara Kingsolver, The Poisonwood Bible.
I have read that book. Yeah, an amazing book.
Yes, it is, and that your life actually sort of reminds me of some of her characters in her book, and that's not a negative either. That's just interesting that you experiencing these things there, and because she wrote about what life was like, I guess it was like in the 50s, actually, probably the 1950s, and there's many historical things that she included in there that were actually happening at that time, and I see you doing that in your books too, which sort of tells about, you know, how our society has moved along and how things have creeped along and are certainly just creeping, trying to get things better. And I noticed also that you had Granny Witch in your book too. So witches are in your book also.
You know what happened in Appalachia is I think it was more from Ireland. There were people that immigrated from Ireland to the rural hills of Appalachia. And the people brought with them their culture, like we all do, you know. And so there was a commingling of traditional healing along with Christian beliefs. And so you see that they're combined. And that's why I included that in the book. There weren't many doctors in that particular time period. And people relied on natural medicines and herbal medicines and in some cases, what I would call a witchcraft kind of thing. And so all that was commingled with the attitude of helping each other and keeping each other, you know, whole physically and mentally. So
what are you going to do next? What's out there? What's coming down the pipe?
Well, you know what? I've got a third book that I'm thinking about doing. It's just with living in South Africa, it's sometimes hard to find the time to get a book written. But I have the outline all in my head. I've got the characters. I've got the story. So I'm sure in the next few months I'm going to get started on that. So
Is it again another part of the series, or is it something entirely different?
no, it's a part of the series. And what I'd like to say about the series is both books are set in Big Creek, but they're certainly standalone books.
Yes,
So
yes, it
you
is. Yes, I agree.
yeah, so yeah. So, they center around the Ashby siblings. And so each book features different siblings. So in the third book, I'm going to be featuring another Ashley sibling. And it'll be set at the beginning of World War II, and it will also cover some stuff with the Great Depression. So that's going to be challenging for me as a writer, but I think I'm up for the task.
And then the other thing I thought, my God, this woman is writing. She's over in South Africa, and she's seeing all these things that most of us would never see, and helping so many people. It seems like that's a story all by itself. Whether it's autobiography, or whether it's a uh, something based upon your experiences there. But I just think that gives you a tremendous amount of material to write about your life.
It does. And you know what? I'd like at some point to do that. In fact, I've interviewed a number of the women that we work with in the rural villages and have record of their stories. And so we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, I'm going to show a picture of your site, by the way, real quick here, just because I think people. Um, there we go. So this is their site called Strong Cross. That's over, and again, her missionary is based in South Africa, um,
Mhm.
and and you've been doing quite some time now, and also in Colorado you did it too, correct?
We did. Yeah, we did. And actually, we work in South Africa. Our ministry board is in Colorado, so we still have strong roots there.
Let me get back to us.
Okay.
Anyways, and uh, yeah, I thought your book was very interesting book, and
Thank
and
you.
I like the whole idea. Well, I like those kind of books. I mean, like uh, Tobacco Road. I love Tobacco Road. You're you. I noticed that you don't have a lot of cursing, although you did have a damn in there. But other than that, I saw that you didn't have any a lot of swearing uh, in the book at all. But you do have a lot of situations that, like you're talking about redemption, that needs redemption. I mean, you have a murderer, Charlie, in there. You have a young 16-year-old girl who thinks she's going to go save him, or wants to go save him. Um, you have these you have a young pregnant woman who, at that particular time, pregnancy, having a child out of wedlock was a horrible thing.
Hmm. And I think there's also some racial tension in the book.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
which I think is interesting, especially in light of what's going on in our world right now or in America right now. But there's some racial things there. And in the book, I deliberately tried to write the book as accurately as I could about the racial tensions that existed, but also included how in the hills of West Virginia, survival depended on your neighbors. And racial things fell by the wayside in hopes of working together and helping each other survive this harsh life. So that's also a redemptive line in the book.
yeah. One of the other things that I noticed in there was how young some of the people were. Like the girl, the 16-year-old girl, who was actually going in to talk to Charlie, and bringing the preacher with her, and some other friends going to um, to the capital of West Virginia, to the prison. Not sure if we can do that nowadays, but that was very interesting. I thought that you had that in there, um, how she was
Mhm.
hopefully trying to convert him and make him know about how bad he really was.
Exactly. And Charlie's story is interesting because he actually grew up in the church, and his father was a pastor, but a pastor that was manipulative with corrupt motives. So Charlie has this thing going on inside of him where his belief system isn't accurate. And Coral's only 16, but in the 1920s in West Virginia, mostly young girls married at the age of 14 to 16. And so she's young and it's a struggle. But during that time, she would have been considered of marriageable age. So
Yeah.
I actually printed out this morning just a couple paragraphs about a conversation that Coral and Charlie had when she was visiting him. And if time permits, may I read
Go ahead.
that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So this is Coral, and she's 16 years old, like David said, and she's gone to the Charleston prison to visit Charlie, who basically has committed atrocities against the Ashby family. So Coral, we're having a not so nice, or I'm sorry, let me start over here. Charlie, we're having a not so nice meeting today, and I'm thinking we need to talk about pleasantries, she began. Do you know why I'm liking mulberries so much? I like the pies and jams and the berries picked fresh, but someday I'm wanting to touch silk. And in other parts of the world, them silkworms do enjoy eating the mulberry leaves. You is done crazy, Charlie declared. Sometimes I am, she answered. But among the women in the holler, there's a longing for finer things. Not to get rich and leave their husbands and littles, but just to know about and see and touch. Charlie shifted in his chair. I'll be remembering that the next time I go courting. Tell me about courting, Charlie. I ain't never been. Well, if courting is meeting gals and speakeasies and doing unspeakables, I have plenty to be telling. I ain't never been to a speakeasy either. She could see Charlie softening. Coral, gals like you don't belong in such places. They belong in churches wearing white and marrying men who will treat 'em right. Charlie, men like you don't belong in such places neither. There's a better way. You belong in church wearing your finest, waiting for a pretty gal to say I do. Charlie hung his head. That ain't never gonna happen. You and me both knows it. So just an interesting encounter between this young girl and a prisoner.
Do you view your writing as a kind of a spiritual practice for yourself, or what?
I do, and you know what? I do a lot of speaking at faith-based events, and so my books are kind of an extension of that. I use my stories a lot just to encourage women in their faith walk, but to encourage women in general that you know what, life is about celebrating, and we have to focus on the right things in our lives and be purposeful in finding day-to-day pleasures.
Do you have other authors that you work with at all, or is this a pretty all-alone experience for you?
Actually, I work with a publishing house called Capture Books,
Uh-huh.
and a network of authors. And so we're really good about getting together once a year or commenting and encouraging each other and working together to promote. There we go. We're working together to promote each other's books. So I have a good 10, 12 authors that I have ongoing friendships with, and that's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's also important, I think, for writers, because writing is a sort of lonely business, and you want other people to read. You want other authors to read what you are writing and to be truthful to you about whether it's good or bad or whatever. And that's real helpful, I think, to have friends like that.
Yeah, you need the input. Yeah.
So do you read your book reviews and
I do read my book reviews, and you know what? I've been blessed. I have great reviews. I think for both my books, my average is like 4.5 stars, so I have great reviews. But sometimes, you know, people write things in book reviews that make me laugh. Like um, it took too long to get my book. Well, that, so they give you a couple stars because they ordered
Right.
get it. And I have no control with that. So, but for the most part, I have great reviews.
You do. Yeah. And like I said, your book seems to be selling from all the stats that I was reading, but I hadn't noticed that you had a Kindle, so that's interesting. When I looked,
Yeah.
I didn't see the Kindle version of that particular book. I found the other book that you had, the first part of the series, that had a Kindle, and seemed to be really doing well with Kindle. I think authors need to know that Kindle books do help you a lot. A lot of people are just cheap and they're going to buy the Kindle version and read that. But it does. I know I write too, by the way, and I know my Kindle sales are usually way above my physical book sales.
Yeah, that usually happens. Now, I'm a Kindle person. I like to hold the book. It's just me, but I can see how Kindle is just a great tool, for readers.
Right.
And then the audio version.
Go ahead.
The audio version of both the books, The Whispering of the Willows and The Melody of the Mulberries, those are fabulous. And I really had nothing to do with that other than I was approached by an organization who wanted to record the books, but they chose the perfect reader. It's just amazing that how the book comes to life in the audio version. So if anybody enjoys audiobooks, I would recommend, my books in that form as well.
Yeah, I think first thing, audiobooks are the one media that for authors are doing better than anything else. I mean, it's doing better than Kindles. I mean, it's going up constantly. So people are really getting into the idea of running around with headset on, listening to audiobooks, or listen to it in the cars. I mean, there's many a time when I've come home, still listening to an audiobook in my car, where I don't want to leave the car until I get to some point where I feel that I can leave and feel content that I knew where we're sort of going. I don't want.
Yeah, you're at a good point in the story.
Yeah. Yes. Anyways, I want to just give you about a couple minutes where I'll shut up and let you make any type of say whatever you'd like to say for the next couple of minutes for those who are viewing it, about whatever things you think are most important about what you do and what you hope people will get from your writing.
Thank you, David. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today. And I'd want to leave the listeners just with this in mind. There's always hope. No matter what difficult circumstances people are going through in life, there's just always hope. There's always a place of redemption and a place of escape. And those places occur in community, where people rally together and they help each other and speak life into circumstances. Those places sometimes occur in church, and sometimes those occur in our families. But redemption or places of hope often come from inside of us, where we have to just break away from mindsets that discourage us or thoughts that things aren't going to get better. So I would just tell your listeners, especially during this difficult time where as a country we went through COVID and now we're struggling with some other things that are just heartbreaking, I would encourage your listeners just to focus on celebrating life, doing what you can to make the world a better place, and know that there's always hope, that there's a better way, and that God has an amazing plan.
That's great. Tonya, I want to really thank you for taking this time and talking to us. And I hope we get a chance to talk again.